Welcome back to The Private Record. I'm happy to have you here. I'm happy to present this episode. Our guest, Harlie. She lives in Utah. She's a very sweet, very kind, just easygoing, cool person. And her story is, well, when she was 9, she's 23 now. When she was 9, her father, as she puts it, committed a drive-by shooting. And afterwards, there was an insanely massive, you'll soon see how massive, standoff at her house that she was in, where her father was, for like 6 hours. And it gets even crazier from there. I'll let her tell it. And it ends up being this, like, you know, obviously that was her submission. That is the main story. But the details and her life and her father's life after the story that she has to tell is arguably just as good, if not better, than the actual main story that she came on the show to tell in the first place. So it kind of, I was just talking about before I started recording this story actually really had like kind of a profound effect on me. And I'm pretty sure you'll be able to see it in my face and my voice just as this episode continues. So I'm excited for you to watch it. I hope you love it. I hope you like it as much as I liked talking to Harlie. She's very cool. I think you'll agree. If you want to be a guest on the show, go to theprivaterecord.com and submit yourself as a potential guest. I can't wait to hear your story. Follow us on socials, Instagram, TikTok, at The Private Record. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, at The Private Record. Like this video, like every video we've ever posted, because frankly, I think we can all agree they're very, very, very likable. Comment on them. It helps the algorithm. It helps me. And please, oh please, the biggest ask I have is to share this with the world, with your friends, with your family, with your deceased loved ones, with everyone, strangers on the street. You know what to do. Thank you so much. I love you. I'll see you again soon.
I'm Harlie. I'm 23 and I have grown up in Utah. I still live in Utah. My story is about when my father shot up an apartment building and then there was a 6-hour standoff afterwards.
Wow. I mean, I kind of knew the basics of the story, but when you put it like that, I already wanted to hear it. Now I want to hear it even more. So let's get right into it. I'm excited. Start wherever you want. Tell it your way.
Sweet. So a little backstory. It was in 2010, so I was 9 when it happened.
Okay.
So I don't remember a whole lot because I blocked it out, but
understandably,
being told that over the past few years, I have started to remember more. And then actually me and my sisters found the police reports from when it occurred.
Whoa.
So a lot of the information is from then as well.
Wow.
More backstory. My parents were divorced, and so both my parents were into drugs. So my grandparents raised me and my 2 sisters.
Okay.
And my dad lived with us. So
it was your grandparents, you and your sister and your dad in the same house, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
And we had a dog, which will come up later.
Okay.
But and I just want to preface by saying when my dad used, he was into meth from a young age. He was like a teenager. When he used, he was not the same person as he was when he was actively using. We actually had 2 different names for him because they were so polar opposites.
Oh, that's interesting. You mean, so at a young age, you and your sister would literally refer to him differently, whether he was using or not using?
It was more when we were older because then I could understand.
Right. Okay. Got it.
This was dad high and this was dad sober.
Wow.
Because when we were little, it was all like the same person to us.
Yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to ask. It's almost like, you know, as a coping mechanism, it makes sense not only to help you understand like what's going on, but also I would imagine would almost make things easier because you're like, you know, all right, when he's like this, it's not really who he is. And when he's like this is who he is. So it's almost a filter that can help you deal with this person that you love very much. And that
Oh, yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah.
And as we got older, it was like, it helped us have a relationship with him because we could separate, oh, that was not dad.
Yeah.
So,
that totally makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So during this time, he had a girlfriend, on and off girlfriend named Kira, and they had a mutual friend who went by the name Tigger. And Kira decided that she no longer wanted to be with my dad, and she wanted to be with Tigger, which kind of upset my dad quite a bit.
Yeah.
Especially because he was using. It was like a lot of his addiction was fueled by women. Like, he'd be sober and then he'd start dating somebody, and then it would go downhill from there if the relationship didn't work out.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
So that's kind of what started all of this. I guess weeks prior to all this happening, he was threatening Kira. So what I remember starts the day before, and we were all hanging out with my dad and this other lady friend that he had. And I remember wrestling with him on her front yard, and we went to Walmart and we were just walking around, and then he took us home. It was me and my little sister. He took us home, and then he took my grandma's car. He didn't have a car at the time, so he was using my grandma's minivan to go do all his drug stuff. So he drops us off around, I think it was 8 or 8:30, and goes and picks up drugs. And this is according to his interview later after everything happened. He went and picked up drugs and then picked up another lady friend. He was a player. But and they did some meth and did the deed, and then he dropped her back off. And then the last thing he remembers after that is taking 100 cc's of meth, which is like a full syringe.
Whoa.
And that's the last thing he remembers of that night.
Wow.
And while all of this is occurring, Kira, his on and off girlfriend, calls the cops saying Eric, which was my dad, Eric claims he's at my mom's house and he's going to kill her. And so the cop shows up. He's taking the statements.
Wait, I'm sorry. Your dad was at her mom's house saying he was going to kill her mom.
That's what my dad had told Kira.
Right. Okay.
Apparently,
okay.
According to Kira.
Got it. Okay.
So they send cop cars to Kira's mom's house, and he wasn't there. My dad was a lot of like words and no actions, like threats and everything. So I'm not surprised that he wasn't there. He was just trying to get a rise out of her, which worked. And then Kira stated to the officer, like, Eric's been making threats for the past few weeks, and I'm just a little bit worried about my safety. So he tells her that he'd patrol the area for the night, and they do that for the next few hours. She called at like 12:30, and then he's patrolling. He patrolled the apartment complex last at 1:20, and then at 1:33 they get multiple calls that shots were fired.
Wow.
At the apartment complex. So, according to my dad, according to the officer in his report, after he had talked with Kira, he shows up, and Kira says that my dad came to the door and knocked on the door, and she said it was like a happy knock, like no aggression or anything towards it. She looked through the people because it's like 1:30 in the morning, and it was my dad. And she told Tigger, like, it's Eric, and they were scared because of these previous threats that he had been making. Right. So she runs to the kitchen to grab her phone to call 911, and apparently, according to her, Tigger army crawls on the floor towards the bedroom. So, and then that's when shots were fired. And there were 3 casings found in the front lawn, and 3 bullet holes through the window. but everyone reported that they heard at least 4 to 5 gunshots. So that'll make more sense later.
Okay.
But so they're canvassing the area. They have cops looking for his van. At this point, they had his license plate and everything. So they're looking for him. Witnesses said that they saw him like kind of laughing as he was leaving. Later on, because it took him quite a few years to remember this, he remembers putting on like an old lady wig to kind of throw people off.
Whoa.
He's a pretty smart guy. So in his head, he thought that would work.
Smart and also stylish.
Yeah, I guess so. So the cop is taking pictures of the bullet holes, and he determines, based off everything he found, that my dad was standing like 5 feet from the door when he shot the bullets. So it takes him a few hours to like process the scene, and then they take Kira and Tigger to a hotel, and then the cop is heading back. He takes them, I think, like a couple cities away, and on his way back, there was cops at our house just kind of watching. He hadn't come back yet. At this point, it's like 5:30, and he comes home. So
wow.
This cop calls it in, and units from 4 different cities go and meet them. They shut down the street behind our house, and then the top of our street and the bottom of our street, and set up like a command center at the top of the street. So I think for a little bit they were just kind of watching the house, getting set in. The cop said that he like called the attorney's office just to kind of explain the situation, and that's when they determined that SWAT should come. So SWAT from the county and the city came, and they were setting up. They called in the house, and my grandparents had a cell phone. No, they had 2 house phones, one in the living room, one at the head of their bed for some reason.
Okay.
And in his report, he said someone answered and like was just kind of breathing and then hung up. And I'm sure it was one of my grandparents. Like, this was 5:30 in the morning.
Yeah, totally. Just being like, what the hell's going on?
Like,
yeah.
Exactly. So they hang up, and then they try calling my dad. He didn't answer and went straight to voicemail. And so they claim for the next 45 minutes they're using a bullhorn to try and get attention to anyone in the house. I don't remember hearing that. After 45 minutes, if they finally wake my grandparents up.
So you were 9 at the time. Is that correct? You were 9? And you, I'm assuming, not that you remember, why would you? But at this time, you don't remember hearing a bullhorn. You were probably sleeping. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my grandma, it finally wakes my grandma and grandpa up. My grandma goes to the door, and they like briefly explain the situation to her, and that we need to get out of the house because they believe that my dad still had a weapon. So I remember, this is when I start to remember things. My grandma came and woke us up, and she was pretty frantic, like, just hurry and get shoes on. We need to get out of the house. And I remember we were so frantic that we left the dog in the house.
Oh, wow.
To like us little girls, it was like, that was a big deal.
I can't even imagine. Yeah. I mean, that was, when I'm 9, the thing I care about the most in the world is my dog. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. So we grabbed shoes, and I remember walking out the front door, and there was guns pointed at us from everywhere. They were on our neighbors' roofs. They were like on front lawns. They had these big like riot shields.
Holy shit. You're 9 years old. What are you even thinking at this time? Like, if you remember at all, what is possibly going through your mind at this time?
I just remember being so confused.
Yeah.
I had no idea what was going on. I'd just woken up, and my grandparents were pretty chill people. And so them being frantic, I was like, what the heck?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
As
it was
kids,
March,
yeah, you look
Utah.
at the adults and you think, if they're scared, I'm definitely scared.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was March in Utah, so like there was snow on the ground. And so I also remember being cold, but they walk us down the street to a cop car and they're getting us in. And because my grandma knew the cop that was walking with us, she convinced him not to take us to the police station, but to take us up the street to a neighbor's house, which was like her house was in eye shot of our house. So,
oh, okay.
It was pretty close. They take us up there, and I remember my grandparents trying to get me and my little sister to like watch movies, and I'm like, yeah, right. I can't, like, I want to be upstairs where all the action is.
Yeah.
So they take us up there, and then for the next 6 hours, they tried different methods trying to get him out. They used the bullhorn more. I remember stories that they had a thermal camera, and they claimed they saw him moving around, but when my dad was coming down, he would just sleep for.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. It sounds almost like, and not that maybe you don't know, but it sounds like he probably was sleeping after taking that much meth, doing something totally crazy, which brings the adrenaline up even more. Your body has no choice but to just go off, basically. Yeah.
Exactly.
So he's probably just in there passed out, and they're like, come out, come out, come out. And he has no idea what's going on.
And I remember they would come up and talk to my grandparents and like get consent to do certain things before they did them. So they came up and they're like, we tried throwing a phone in there and that didn't work. Like he didn't answer. And my grandma at this point was really frustrated. She's like, it's because he's asleep.
Yeah.
She knew at this point because he had already been in prison before for drugs. So she was very familiar with his pattern and everything. She was frustrated. She's like, let me just go in and get him. He's not violent towards me. Like, this will be so much easier if you just let me go in and get him. But they wouldn't let her. And so that at that point, they decided to throw tear gas into the house.
Whoa. This is such like, I know what your father had done is obviously extremely dangerous, and it makes him a complete wild card in terms of the violence he might perpetrate. But this sounds like such an over-the-top operation considering the offense, right? Like 2 SWAT teams from 2 different areas, cops from 4 different cities, tear gas, thermal cameras. Like the dude's asleep. You know what I mean? Like guys, just go in and wake him up and take him away, right? But I mean, look, I get being cautious. It makes sense. No one wants any cop to get shot because there's somebody on meth that might hurt them inside. But like at a certain point, the dude's a meth head and he's passed out. Like go in there. Yeah.
And you think there'd be a little trust like in his mother, like,
yes,
oh, she knows him, she knows her routine. But instead, they decide to put tear gas in. They shoot 1 canister. They broke a basement window and did into the basement. Yeah. And then they opened like the back door and threw it into the kitchen.
Wow.
So the last thing my dad remembered was taking meth. And then the next thing he remembers was it was smoky and he couldn't breathe and his face was burning. And in his head, he's like, oh my gosh, the house is on fire.
Right.
So he runs up the stairs and he checks our bedrooms for us. Because in his interview, he said all I could think about was his kids.
Yeah.
And so, which shows his sober side that he had a heart. But
it's kind of interesting, just on a very human level, that is so understandable to anyone on the planet understands that. And then, contrasting that with the last thing he remembers is doing 100 cc's of meth. And then what he did after that was something almost no one can relate to, which is shooting up an apartment complex with your friend and your ex-girlfriend. It's like it's like 2 sides of a coin that are, all within the same person. It speaks to you having 2 names for him. It's like this person is both extremely relatable, extremely human, and extremely sort of understandable. And then he's also this guy who puts on women's wigs and shoots up apartment complexes. You know, it's very complicated. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, go on. Yeah.
That's relationship with addicts.
Yeah.
It's like, I feel like to have any relationship with them, you need to separate it as two people.
Yeah. No, it's true. Yeah.
So he runs up the stairs, checks our bedrooms, and then he just figures that we were at church or something.
Mm-hmm.
So then he runs out the front door and sees cops, and that's when he knows, like, oh, like, there's no fire. They're here for me.
Yeah.
But he still didn't know why. So he, like, falls onto the grass, and his face is super red, and then they just tackle him, and then they take him to a medical center to, like, treat him for, like, burns to the eyes and stuff. All while this is happening, we had a friend that lived down the street, and her dad was recording it all on, like, his little tape recorder.
Whoa.
And so after everything had happened and they let people out of their houses again, because they were going to all the neighbors saying, stay away from your windows. They wouldn't let anyone leave. So once we were all able to leave our houses again, they came up and showed us the video. And that's where, like, I remember seeing him fall on the grass and his face was red, and then them tackle him.
Wait, when you say they showed you the video, when you say they, who is they?
They, as in, like, our neighbors.
Oh man, what a dickhead neighbor. Why is the neighbor showing the 9-year-old daughter a video of her father getting arrested?
No clue.
God, that alone is traumatic. Jeez. Okay. Anyway, some people are just fucking clueless, man. Okay.
So, and I don't remember, like, this, but apparently me and my sisters were still really worried about the dog.
Aww.
And so my grandma was, now that they had shot tear gas into the house, she was beyond frustrated. Like, she felt like it was handled in a way that was like, over the top. She could have handled it a lot better.
Yeah, beyond over the top. That is so crazy. Yeah. She
had asked the cops multiple times, can you go get their dog? They just saw their dad, like, taken off in a police car. Can you please just go get their dog? That's what they're worried about. And after a few times of not being receptive to that, I didn't witness this, but it's all a funny story now. She grabs the cop by the collar of his shirt, and she's this 4'11" woman. She pulls him down to her level, and she's, like, swearing at him. She's like, my granddaughters just saw their dad, like, in the worst light, and they're worried about their dog. And he's like, ma'am, if you don't take your hands off me, I'm going to have to arrest you. Yeah. And so, but they finally go get the dog. I guess she was scary enough that they decided to go get her.
Relentless.
And I remember her running up the street to us, and as soon as we pet her, like, our hands burned and our eyes were burning because she was covered in tear gas.
Whoa.
But apparently tear gas isn't, like, harmful to pets or animals, so she was fine, other than she was just covered.
She's just making everyone who pets her suffer, but she's totally okay. Yeah. Totally fucking clueless. The dog's like, what's the big deal? Like, where's my food, you know? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't remember a whole ton after this, but apparently a few hours had gone by. They were trying to air out the house. They had searched the house. There was no gun. And my aunts came, and we went to stay with them. And we lived in a hotel for 3 months after that.
Oh my God.
With tear gas, it, like, sticks to everything. We had to wipe down the walls. We had to rip out carpets. We had to wipe down and wash all of our items.
Hey, police, use something else. Like, what the fuck? I didn't even know that. That's so terrible. I've never heard that.
After, like, if there was even a spot that was missed and you went, like, near it, for years after, we would smell it, and it would burn a little bit, and we're like, oh, that's tear gas.
Oh my God.
I remember going to school, because it was on a Sunday that this standoff happened. I remember going to school the next day and still being scared. I was like, what? Probably in shock.
Yeah.
And getting called to the principal's office, and because it had been on the news.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
My mom, she lived in the area her mother called her and was like, hey, do you know that Eric and the girls are on the news? And that's how my mom found out that everything had happened. So everyone at school knew, or like teachers and administrators. So we got called to the principal's office and they asked us about it. And for 3 months after that, I just remember walking home from school and we would hang out at the house for a few hours to clean everything, and then we'd go to the hotel.
Wow, what a weird life for a 9-year-old. Like, that is so, what a strange period. I mean, not only was it a long time ago, so obviously that affects your memory of it, but it makes total sense that you would not remember that much because your brain probably did a lot of work making sure you didn't remember it that well. Like, it's not a pleasant experience. I mean, we sort of operate at our best and seek familiarity. That is the least familiar situation imaginable. You're not living at home, but during the days after school, you're cleaning your house and making sure all the tear gas is gone from it. Like, that is so weird. Yeah. Jeez.
And we remember, like, the canister of tear gas that they shot into the living room had burned a hole and like went all the way to the basement. So,
my God.
So these are just like little snippets that me and my sisters remember.
Yeah.
But after that, so he didn't remember anything. In his interview, he did say, if I wanted to kill Kira, I would have killed her. Because they were like, you're being charged with this. And he's like, oh, well, if I wanted to kill her, I would have killed her.
Was he charged with like attempted murder? Is that something that it was? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Attempted murder. One of them was a gun charge because he was a felon on parole, so he wasn't supposed to have one.
Yeah.
And a couple others I can't remember, but because he didn't remember anything, he pled guilty and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. So I think he served 3 and then got released, but then fell back into drugs and they put him back in. So he did end up serving the 5 years, but
oh, I see.
So for the next 5 years, our life was like driving down to the prison to visit Dad, walking through metal detectors, talking to him through a glass wall.
What was that like, if you don't mind talking about that a little bit?
To me, I feel like it was normal. Like, that was just how we talked to Dad, or like getting his calls on the phone. Like, in my head, it's like, oh, this is a collect call from Eric Larson. Like, that will always be imprinted in my head. But it was just the normal, like, oh, we're going to go visit Dad this weekend. And it was like an hour away from our house. So like, we'd make a road trip out of it every time and like go to dinner.
And were you like, at that age, I guess like 9 to 14, that is such a significant age. So much is imprinted on us. We're feeling things so intensely. We're sort of getting the first whiff of what it's like to be an adult, and we don't even really realize it. But was it something you would look forward to every week to see your dad, or was it something you dreaded, or would it kind of rotate between the two?
It was something I looked forward to.
Yeah,
I remember during that time, a lot of it is like blocked out, but just missing him so much. Because when he was sober, he was like amazing.
Yeah.
So when he was in prison, he was super nice. He was so loving. He did make a lot of promises that in my eyes were empty. Like, I'm sure he meant them. Like, when I get out, I'll be clean and we can get a place and we can all live together. And I'm sure he meant them and wanted to achieve them, but he never did because he was just so addicted to drugs. But I just remember being super excited to see him every time.
Yeah.
And getting his calls and writing him letters, and he could write us letters. And he was a really good artist. So he would send us like birthday cards, just super intricate like drawings that he would give us. So he passed away last year from cancer, and me and my sisters were going through his stuff just like a month ago, and we found a notebook with a letter written in it, and it was like his version of the truth of what happened that night.
Oh,
and
wow.
he had written it years later because It took him a long time to kind of like start to remember what had happened. But in his letter, he like was apologizing for what he did and the repercussions of that night. And he said, he's like, you guys were the main victims, all that. And then he started talking about when he was young, he took like gun control classes, and in those classes, he said that they said never raise a gun unless you need to use it. So he said, I would never pull the trigger unless my life was in danger. He posed the question, why were all the witnesses saying that 4 to 5 shots were heard, but only 3 casings from my gun were found? So then he claims that he was shooting to warn, not to kill, because he was shot at first. And,
I see. Right. Okay, yeah.
There's no, like, going through police reports and everything, there's no, like, witness statement or victim statement from Tigger. Like, none of that. The only, like, recollection we have of what happened in his eyes was from Kira. And so my dad said he shot to warn, not to kill, and that was his biggest mistake. Because if he would have shot Tigger, then maybe there would have been proof that, because his gun would have been by him.
Oh, right. I see. Yeah. That's such a trip to think through. Like, he was on meth and his memory was gone. And then he spent so much time in jail trying to remember. And then he's trying to piece together like what he knows about himself, trying to apply that to a hole in his memory in such like a crazy high stakes moment that obviously had such major implications on his life. I mean, it's the reason he's in prison. And obviously, in a sense, no one knows him better than him. But at the same time, no one can know. Like, it's true that no one can ever know, you know? I'm sure even if he was here, he would admit that no one can know that is truly what it was, you know? That's so much uncertainty. It's so difficult to think through, let alone try to piece together. But that is weird that why wouldn't they also, I mean, ostensibly there's 2 victims in this crime. It would be, is it Kira, was it? And Tigger. By the way, Tigger, this man's an adult. He shouldn't be going by Tigger. But putting that aside for a moment, that's weird that he wouldn't be interviewed as well. Yeah.
It's definitely interesting. And the version, my dad was definitely a whole different person back then. Like, from what I heard from people and everything, he was a very different person, especially when it came to when he was using. Yeah. Because the version of my dad I knew when I was using, or when he was using, even just the past like 5 to 8 years, is different than what I heard about a long time ago. So I want to believe that he was like shooting in self-defense, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know. Both of them make sense, but I just don't know what to believe.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think these things are tricky because obviously, as humans, we are really good at figuring out ways to believe what we want. But at the same time, sometimes being aware of that, it pushes us away from believing what we want because we know we're prone to believing what we want. So it's like, but at the same time, just saying the word belief, it implies that, again, it implies that we don't know, and you have to choose to believe one or the other. And while it is difficult to live inside of this not knowing, this state of non-knowing, it's still ultimately, I think, the healthiest, because you're not letting yourself fall prey to your own desires, basically. You know, you want what you want. It's easier to believe that your dad was this, that, or the other. You know, somebody else wants to believe your dad is a villain and totally the bad guy. They were going to believe this. But in reality, the reality is almost certainly somewhere in between what the two extremes might lead one to believe. You know what I mean? So in a sense, it makes sense to sort of believe what you want, but I think it is ultimately healthiest to try to live inside the space of not knowing. And also knowing that that doesn't have really any impact on your relationship with your father, how you feel about your father, how he felt about you. Those things are separate and entirely unto themselves, you know? But yeah, you could drive yourself crazy trying to figure out what it might be, but it's more likely to have been. And at the end of the day, no one will ever know, you know? And it sucks, but I think it's wise. And you seem wise beyond your years. How old are you now? You said you're 23?
I'm 23.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense that you seem mature beyond that because of all this shit you've been through. You kind of had to grow up in a hurry. You know, this stuff happened when you're 9. Most kids are fucking not doing that when they're 9, you know, as I'm sure you know. Speaking of that, did you feel that at your age, at that time, while it was all happening? Did you feel yourself sort of, I don't know what the word is, but, you know, other kids are living more sort of normal lives, I'm assuming. Did you start to feel yourself being different because of what you were going through from kids your age? Or were they kind of separate in your mind? Your life there and your life with other kids?
Yeah, I definitely feel that.
Yeah.
Especially because this was all I had ever known. Like my dad had already been in prison prior to this. So what I had known was like going to visit my dad. And as I got older and like was more aware of other family situations, that mine wasn't normal, I think that's when I started feeling like why does my life have to be this way? Like why can't I have 2 parents that are together? And it took me a long time to just kind of accept it was what it was. And I guess what drove me was that I was just going to change that for my kids. Like this is what I grew up with. There's no reason to be upset about it because I can't change it. So what I can change is like the future. So
yeah, I mean, again, that's incredibly mature for 23. You know, I don't think I was sitting there able to think thoughts like that when I was 23 myself. I don't even want to think about the way I was when I was 23 because I was such a fucking idiot. But yeah, this is a wild story. You said your father passed away a year ago. I'm sorry to hear that. That's awful. How old was he?
He was 32 when all this happened, and then when he passed away, it was right before his 46th birthday.
Oh, he was so young.
He was very young.
That's terrible. I'm so sorry to hear that.
Thank you. It's sad, but he's escaped a life of addiction and pain. And
yeah, no, it's true. I mean, having been around addicts enough as much as I have, obviously not to the extent that you are familiar with it, but there is that element of like at the very least, the suffering is over, you know? But yeah, that's tough. What are you, I know you said you're still in Utah. You mentioned, do you have kids now?
Yeah, I have a son.
Oh, cool. How old is your son?
He's 2 months old.
Oh my gosh, you just had him. Congratulations.
I just had him. Thank you. I actually found out that it was a boy the day before my dad passed, and I got to tell him.
Oh my God.
The day before. So he was sober for 2 years, which was the longest he had been sober. And he had moved out into an apartment on his own, which he had never done before. So there's lots of little miracles in it all that, like, we got 2 good years with him. Wow. I got to tell him that I was having a baby boy before he passed away, the day before he passed.
That's like storybook. That is crazy. Wow. Yeah. It's kind of like poetic. That's very... So you found how far along were you when he did pass away?
I was 14 weeks along.
Oh wow. He must have been so proud and excited, you know. Was that going to be his first grandkid of his own?
It was. My sisters have both had kids.
Oh, okay.
So it was going to be his fourth.
And his illness that he ended up passing from, it had nothing to do with his addiction or anything like that?
No. So actually during his 5-year sentence, that's when they found melanoma on his head.
Oh my God.
Because the prison system, they thought they had treated it fully.
Oh.
We're not sure if like it had come back or if it was never fully gone. But we found it last year and it was pretty much all over his body at that point.
Oh God.
Mm-hmm.
Man, some people really get the shit end of the stick. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, you have your entire life ahead of you and you have a son now, and that is extremely exciting. Well, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate you telling the story. Is there anything else you wanted to say before? I mean, that detail, I love how like the most fascinating detail potentially just like got sort of tacked on at the end. I mean, the fact that your dad found out that you were having a child of your own, or sorry, a son, he knew you were having a child the day before he passed is so wild. Is there anything else that you wanted to share before we part ways here?
I think one thing I want to say, and I'm guilty of this too, is just judging an addict before. Something I've learned is addicts use for a reason. Like my dad used because he was hurting from his childhood. And like I have other people in my life who have addicts, and it's so easy to judge from the outside.
Yeah.
And just treat them as a bad person when in reality they're just someone that's hurting, making stupid decisions, trying to mask what's hurting them. So I guess something I would just want to say is like, don't judge before you fully understand someone. And if you don't understand, then don't make an opinion at all. Yeah.
I mean, well put. I find the judgment of addicts in particular to be one of the stranger things we do as sort of like a culture. It doesn't make sense even to think. I mean, if addicts are then committing crimes, I guess I get it, which obviously your father ostensibly did. But like, then I get why people would judge an addict, because then the addict is now a criminal. But like, just the fact that they do drugs, just the fact that they're addicted to them, that has no bearing on whether they are a quote good person or a bad person. That is just entirely separate. And the fact that people conflate them, it's almost this like archaic way of thinking that many people, for whatever reason, haven't grown away from or expanded beyond. It's almost like how people are still caught up with like the reefer madness thing, thinking everybody who smokes a little bit of weed is like a bad person. It's just like, let's fucking get beyond that. It's not the case. Addicts are bad people just as often as non-addicts are bad people. There's fucking bad people everywhere. Addict or not has nothing to do with it. Yeah. But yeah, so I totally agree. Well put. You put it better than I did. But yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. Thanks for wanting to come on and wanting to share that story. Yeah. I really appreciate it. I think it's going to be a good episode, and we'll let you know when it's coming out.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Cool. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you so much.